A billionaire is shocked to find his black maid has a matching birthmark. As DNA test results loom, what truth about their connection will be revealed? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The evening sun casts long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Mark Reynolds' study, where he sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers drumming against the polished surface. The peaceful silence of his luxurious mansion was interrupted by the sharp ring of his phone. Dr. Anderson's name flashed across the screen, causing Mark's heart to skip a beat. He hadn't expected the call so soon. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Anderson's voice carried a note of professional curiosity. "I've been reviewing your recent medical records, and something interesting caught my attention. The birthmark you mentioned during your last checkup, it's quite unique in its pattern and location." Mark unconsciously touched the distinctive mark on his left shoulder, a habit he developed over the years. "What about it, doctor?" "Well, these particular birthmarks are extremely rare, and they often have genetic implications. I believe a DNA test might provide some fascinating insights into your family history. Of course, it's entirely up to you, but given your interest in genealogy." Mark's gaze drifted to the family portraits lining his study walls, generations of Reynolds looking down at him with stern expressions. The thought of uncovering unknown branches of his family tree both thrilled and terrified him. "I'll think about it," he replied noncommittally, ending the call. Unknown to Mark, Lisa Morgan stood frozen in the hallway outside his study, her hand clutching a stack of freshly laundered towels. The conversation had drifted through the partially open door, and her own birthmark, hidden beneath her uniform's collar, seemed to burn with newfound significance. Lisa had worked for the Reynolds family for 5 years, maintaining their sprawling mansion with quiet efficiency. She took pride in her work, but more than that, she had developed a deep respect for Mark, who, unlike many wealthy employers, treated her with genuine kindness. Now, the possibility of a connection between them sent her mind spiraling through memories of her childhood. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap, asking about the strange mark on her shoulder. "It makes you special," her mother would say, but her eyes always held a shadow of something more, something unspoken. The foster homes that followed her mother's death never gave her answers, and eventually, Lisa learned to keep her questions to herself. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped Lisa from her reverie. David Reynolds, Mark's younger brother, strode down the hallway with the confidence of someone who believed they owned every space they occupied. His perfectly tailored suit and carefully styled hair projected the image of a successful politician, but Lisa had worked in the house long enough to sense the ambition that simmered beneath his polished exterior. David paused, his sharp eyes taking in Lisa's presence and the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched the towels. "Everything all right, Lisa?" His tone was pleasant, but there was an undercurrent of calculation in his gaze. "Yes, Mr. David. Just finishing up the laundry." Lisa moved to step around him, but David's hand shot out, grasping the doorframe and effectively blocking her path. "You know, I couldn't help but notice you've been spending quite a bit of time around my brother's study lately." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mark's always had a soft spot for the help, but remember your place. Before Lisa could respond, Mark's voice cut through the tension. "David, I didn't know you were stopping by." He appeared in the doorway, his presence causing David to step back smoothly, as if he hadn't just been intimidating an employee. "Brother, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in." David's politician smile was back in place. "Maybe we could discuss the upcoming charity gala? The Reynolds family name needs to maintain its sterling reputation." Mark's eyes flickered between David and Lisa, noting the subtle signs of discomfort in his housekeeper's posture. "Of course. Lisa, thank you for your work. You can leave those towels in the guest bathroom." Lisa nodded and quickly retreated, but not before catching the calculating look that passed across David's face as he watched her go. In that moment, 3 lives began to intertwine in ways none of them could have predicted. Mark with his growing curiosity about his family's secrets, Lisa with her hidden hopes and fears, and David with his determination to maintain control over the Reynolds legacy. As the brothers settled into Mark's study, the setting sun painted the room in deep oranges and reds, casting shadows that seemed to dance around the family portraits. The simple question of a birthmark had set in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and the true meaning of belonging. The mansion's kitchen gleamed with professional-grade stainless steel appliances, but it was the warm aroma of fresh coffee and baking bread that made it feel alive. Mark found himself spending more time here lately, drawn by the comfortable silence he shared with Lisa as she worked. Today, he sat at the marble island, watching her knead dough with practiced movements. "You never mentioned you were a baker," Mark observed, noting the confidence in her hands as they worked the dough. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the flour dust in the air, creating a soft halo around her focused form. Lisa continued her methodical movements, but a small smile played at her lips. "It was my mother's passion before she passed. She always dreamed of opening her own bakery." Her hands stilled for a moment. "I've been saving up, actually. There's this small storefront on Oak Street that would be perfect for a confectionery." Mark noticed the way her voice softened when speaking of her dream, but also caught the undertone of doubt. "What's stopping you?" "Reality, Mr. Reynolds." Lisa began shaping the dough into rolls. "Starting a business requires more than just savings and dreams. There's licenses, insurance, equipment." She trailed off, her shoulders tensing slightly. Besides, who would take a housekeeper-turned-baker seriously? The self-doubt in her voice stirred something in Mark. He recognized it, the same uncertainty he felt despite his wealth and status, the feeling that he was somehow playing a part rather than living authentically. Meanwhile, across town in his campaign office, David Reynolds was building a different kind of plan. His computer screen displayed Lisa's background check, social media profiles, and employment history. A young intern stood nervously before his desk. "Find out everything you can about her family history," David instructed, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. And make sure this stays completely confidential." "Yes, sir." The intern nodded, but hesitated. "If I may ask, why is a housekeeper so important?" David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because, Michael, perception is everything in politics. And right now, my brother is spending an awful lot of time with someone who might threaten everything we've built." He turned to the window, overlooking the city skyline. "The Reynolds name carries weight in the city. We can't afford any complications." Back at the mansion, Mark and Lisa's morning routine had evolved into something more personal. As Lisa arranged the freshly baked rolls on a cooling rack, Mark found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced aloud. "Sometimes I look at all of this," he gestured to the expansive kitchen, the mansion beyond, and it feels like someone else's life. Like I'm just maintaining what generations of Reynolds men built, without really knowing who I am outside of the family name." Lisa paused in her work, studying him with unexpected understanding. "At least you have a legacy," she offered quietly. "Some of us are trying to build something from nothing." The weight of their shared vulnerability hung in the air, creating a connection that transcended their supposed stations. Mark realized that despite their different circumstances, they both understood the pressure of expectations, his from generations of wealth, hers from a society that tried to define her by her current position. Unknown to them, David's machinations were already in motion. His office buzzed with activity as researchers dug into Lisa's past, looking for anything that could be used to discredit her. But what they would find would shake the foundations of the Reynolds family itself. That evening, as Lisa prepared to leave for the day, she lingered in the kitchen, touching the small notebook where she kept her mother's recipes. The dream of her own bakery seemed simultaneously closer and further away than ever. The growing connection with Mark gave her confidence, but it also complicated everything. Mark watched her from the doorway, struck by how natural her presence felt in his home. The birthmark on his shoulder seemed to tingle with awareness, a physical reminder of the mystery that had brought them to this point. He wanted to help her achieve her dreams, but something held him back, perhaps the same force that had kept him tethered to his family's expectations all these years. As the sun set over the Reynolds estate, 3 separate paths were being forged. Lisa, daring to dream beyond her circumstances. Mark, questioning the life that had been mapped out for him since birth, and David, determined to maintain the status quo at any cost. The truth about their connection lay buried in the past, waiting to emerge and change everything. The staff break room buzzed with barely concealed whispers as Lisa entered. She could feel the weight of judgmental stares from her co-workers, particularly from Margaret, the head housekeeper who had worked for the Reynolds family for over 2 decades. The morning light filtering through the small window did nothing to warm the chilly atmosphere. "Well, if it isn't Miss Special," Margaret's voice cut through the murmurs. "Spending an awful lot of time in the main kitchen these days, aren't we? Some of us know our proper place in this house." Lisa focused on putting away her lunch, her movements deliberate and controlled. The other staff members watched the exchange with poorly hidden interest. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Your worth isn't determined by other people's limitations." She turned to face Margaret, maintaining her composure. "I do my job professionally and thoroughly, Margaret. Mr. Reynolds appreciates my work in the kitchen. That's all there is to it." Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she closed her locker. "Oh, I'm sure he appreciates your work," another maid snickered, prompting scattered laughter. "Just remember, girls like us don't get fairy tale endings." Lisa left the break room with her head held high, but their words stung more than she wanted to admit. Instead of letting it break her spirit, she channeled her emotions into planning her future bakery. During her lunch break, she sketched designs for her dream shop in a worn notebook, adding notes about specialty pastries and unique flavor combinations. Meanwhile, in his private study, Mark was deep into his own investigation. Scattered across his desk were old photographs, yellowed newspapers, and family documents he'd retrieved from the estate's archives. One particular photograph caught his attention, a group shot from the 1960s showing his grandfather standing proudly in front of Sweet Dreams Confetti Winery, a once famous local candy factory. The photograph showed workers lined up outside the factory, and something about their faces tugged at Mark's memory. He picked up his magnifying glass, examining each face carefully until he stopped, his breath catching. In the second row, a young woman with a familiar smile stood wearing a factory uniform. She could have been Lisa's twin. The discovery sent Mark into a research frenzy. He pulled up old employee records, property deeds, and newspaper clippings. Sweet Dreams Confectionery had been more than just a candy factory. It had been the heart of the community until its mysterious closure in 1975. The Reynolds family had owned it, but the circumstances of its shutdown were suspiciously absent from official records. Later that afternoon, Mark and Lisa met in the Garden Cafe, a neutral space where their growing friendship felt less confined by the mansion's social hierarchy. The autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee and falling leaves as they settled into their usual corner table. "I found something interesting today," Mark began, carefully pulling out the factory photograph. "Does this woman look familiar to you?" Lisa's hands trembled as she took the photograph. Her eyes widened in recognition. That's my grandmother, Eleanor Morgan. But how did you?" "She worked at Sweet Dreams Confectionery, owned by my grandfather," Mark explained, watching Lisa's reaction closely. "The same factory where your mother later worked as well, wasn't it?" Lisa nodded slowly, memories flooding back. "Mom used to tell me stories about that place. She said it was magical, the smell of chocolate and caramel, the sound of the machines." Her voice softened. She always said her happiest memories were made there, until the day it suddenly closed. The connection between their families suddenly felt more tangible than ever. Mark leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Lisa, I think there's more to this story than either of us knows. The factory's closure, our birthmarks, your mother's passion for baking, it can't all be coincidence." "What are you suggesting?" Lisa asked, her heart racing with possibilities she'd never dared consider. "I'm suggesting that maybe your dream of opening a bakery isn't just about following your mother's footsteps. Maybe it's about reclaiming a legacy that belongs to both our families." The weight of this revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Their fingers brushed accidentally as Lisa handed back the photograph, and neither pulled away immediately. The touch seemed to carry the electricity of their shared history, their intertwined destinies. Unknown to them, David had his own spy in the cafe, discreetly snapping photos of their meeting. These images would soon become ammunition in his campaign to protect what he saw as the true Reynolds legacy. But as Mark and Lisa sat there, piecing together their family's past, they were building something stronger than David's manipulations, a bridge between their worlds that no amount of social prejudice could tear down. The mystery of Sweet Dreams Confectionery and its connection to their shared birthmark beckoned them deeper into the past. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their table, both Mark and Lisa sensed they were on the verge of discoveries that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their places in the world. The annual Reynolds Foundation Gala loomed on the horizon, transforming the mansion into a hive of activity. In his private office downtown, David Reynolds meticulously reviewed his prepared speech, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. His computer screen displayed a dossier on Lisa Morgan, compiled over weeks of covert investigation. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across his face as he rehearsed the words that would destroy her reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen of Boston's finest families," he practiced his poll, a Titian smile firmly in place. "Tonight, I must address a concerning situation within our own household." He paused, adjusting his tie in the reflection of his window. The city sprawled below him, a testament to the Reynolds family's influence he believed Lisa threatened. A knock interrupted his rehearsal. His assistant entered with a fresh stack of documents. "Sir, we've found something interesting about Ms. Morgan's mother's employment history at Sweet Dreams Confectionery." David's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "Perfect timing. Add it to my speech notes for tonight. The Foundation supporters need to understand exactly what kind of person has infiltrated our family." Across town, Mark sat in his study, increasingly uneasy about the upcoming gala. Years of attending such events had taught him to read the signs. David's unusual interest in the guest list, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, the subtle smirks from his brother's closest allies. Something was brewing. Unable to shake his concerns, Mark confronted David in the mansion's library that afternoon. The room's dark wood paneling and leather-bound books created an appropriately tense atmosphere for their confrontation. "What are you planning, David?" Mark's direct question cut through the pretense of brotherly affection they usually maintained. David looked up from his phone, his expression a masterwork of innocence. "Planning? I'm ensuring our family's gala maintains its prestigious reputation. Something you seem less concerned about lately." "Don't play games." Mark stepped closer, his voice low but intense. "I've seen your people following Lisa, taking photos, digging into her past." "Ah, yes, Lisa." David's facade cracked slightly, revealing the steel beneath. "Tell me, brother, what would our father say about you spending so much time with the help? About you investigating old family businesses without consulting me? About you potentially compromising everything we've built?" "Our father isn't here," Mark countered. "And maybe it's time we question some of the things we've built." David rose slowly from his chair, his calm demeanor belying the anger in his eyes. "You've always been the soft one, Mark. The dreamer. That's why father left me in charge of the family's political interests. You're too easily swayed by sob stories and pretty faces." "Is that what you think this is about?" Mark's frustration burst through. "This isn't about Lisa's position or her looks. This is about truth, David. About what really happened at Sweet Dreams Confectionery. About why our family has that property locked up tighter than a bank vault." The mention of the confectionery caused David to flinch almost imperceptibly. "Some things are better left in the past, brother. For everyone's sake." Meanwhile, in her modest apartment across the city, Lisa stood before her mirror, smoothing down the elegant navy blue dress she'd splurged on for the gala. The garment represented 3 months of careful saving, but she needed to look the part tonight. Not for the wealthy guests or their judgment, but for herself. She touched the birthmark on her shoulder, visible above the dress's neckline. For the first time in her life, she decided not to cover it. This mark, identical to Mark's, had already set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Tonight, she would face whatever came with dignity. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Sarah, another household staff member. David's people are talking. Something big planned for tonight. Be careful. Lisa took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She thought of her mother's strength, of the generations of women in her family who had worked hard and held their heads high despite society's attempts to diminish them. Tonight wouldn't be about proving herself to the wealthy elite. It would be about standing firm in who she was, regardless of her past or position. As evening approached, the mansion's halls filled with staff making final preparations. Crystal glasses clinked, flower arrangements were adjusted, and the murmur of approaching confrontation hung in the air. Mark's investigation into the confectionery and Lisa's connection to it had stirred up more than just old memories. It had awakened sleeping giants of family secrets and corporate cover-ups that had been buried for decades. The stage was set for a night that would change everything. David prepared to protect his family's carefully constructed image. Mark steeled himself to defend both Lisa and the truth, and Lisa herself dressed for battle in her own way, ready to face whatever revelations the evening might bring. The annual Reynolds Foundation Gala was about to become the backdrop for a collision of past and present, of truth and lies, of power and justice. The Reynolds mansion blazed with light against the darkening sky, its windows glowing like jewels as Boston's elite arrived for the annual gala. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gilt mirrors, reflecting the wealth and power that had defined the Reynolds family for generations. Mark stood at the top of the main staircase, outwardly calm in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but internally wrestling with the weight of impending confrontation. He watched the guests arrive, noting the familiar faces of business leaders, politicians, and social luminaries. Each greeting felt mechanical, each smile a mask hiding his growing concern about David's plans for the evening. The constant murmur of conversation carried undertones of anticipation. Word had spread that something unprecedented would occur tonight. From his vantage point, Mark observed Lisa's entrance. She moved through the crowd with remarkable poise, her navy blue dress setting her apart from the flashier attire of the wealthy guests. The birthmark on her shoulder, deliberately visible, seemed to catch the light with each movement. Mark noticed several guests doing double takes, their eyes moving between Lisa's mark and the identical one visible beneath the edge of his collar. David worked the room like the skilled politician he was, moving from group to group with practiced charm. But Mark recognized the predatory glint in his brother's eyes, the way he carefully positioned key allies throughout the ballroom. Each movement was calculated, building toward something that made Mark's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Quite the turnout," David commented, appearing suddenly at Mark's side. "Perfect for important announcements, wouldn't you say?" His smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the crowd. Though some guests seemed to have forgotten their proper place in the hierarchy. Mark turned to face his brother fully. "Everyone here was invited, David. Everyone belongs." "Belonging isn't about an invitation, brother. It's about birthright, about protecting what generations of Reynolds men have built." David's voice hardened. "Something you seem to have forgotten lately." Before Mark could respond, David moved to the center of the room, tapping his glass for attention. The crowd hushed, turning expectantly toward the younger Reynolds brother. Mark's hands clenched at his sides as he recognized the expression on David's face, the same look he wore before destroying political opponents. "Distinguished guests, beloved friends," David began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. "The Reynolds Foundation has always stood for excellence, integrity, and the preservation of proper social order. Tonight, I must address a situation that threatens these very principles." The crowd shifted, attention sharpening. Lisa stood near the back of the room, her face composed but her hands clasped tightly together. Mark began moving through the crowd toward her, understanding that whatever came next would change everything. "Recently, certain individuals have attempted to manipulate their way into our family's confidence," David continued, his gaze fixing meaningfully on Lisa. "Using superficial similarities and convenient coincidences to forge connections that have no basis in reality. Taking advantage of kind hearts for personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the assembled guests. Some shot accusatory glances at Lisa, while others looked uncomfortable with the public nature of David's attack. Mark quickened his pace, but the crowd seemed to thicken between him and his target. The Reynolds name carries weight in this city. David's voice took on an edge of steel. We cannot allow opportunists to tarnish generations of careful stewardship. Tonight, I have evidence that will expose. That's enough. Mark's voice cut through his brother's speech. He had finally reached the center of the room, positioning himself between David and Lisa. The guests fell silent, sensing the unprecedented nature of this confrontation between the Reynolds brothers. Lisa Morgan has shown nothing but integrity and dedication in her work for our family, Mark continued, his voice steady and clear. Any investigation into her character reveals only strength, dignity, and determination. If anyone here questions her right to be among us, they should first question their own understanding of worth. The silence in the ballroom grew heavy with tension. David's face flushed with barely contained rage, his carefully orchestrated moment of triumph derailing before his eyes. Lisa stood straighter, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she watched Mark defend her reputation. Furthermore, Mark added, turning to address the entire room, Lisa's connection to our family runs deeper than any of us initially knew. The truth about that connection, and about certain aspects of our family's past, deserves to be heard in full, not twisted into weapons for a personal agenda. The assembled guests exchanged glances, uncertain how to react to this dramatic departure from the usual polite fictional of high society events. David gripped his champagne glass, so tightly it seemed in danger of shattering. The foundations of power and privilege that had seemed so solid at the beginning of the evening now trembled with the possibility of change. In that moment of suspended animation, as Boston's elite waited to see how this unprecedented scene would play out, the true battle lines were drawn. It was no longer simply about Mark and Lisa, or even about the mysteries of their shared birthmark. It had become a confrontation between old power and new truth, between inherited privilege and earned respect, between those who would preserve the past at any cost and those brave enough to forge a different future. The aftermath of the gala settled over the mansion like morning fog, thick with unspoken words and shifting possibilities. Mark found Lisa in the mansion's conservatory, where the first light of dawn filtered through Victorian glass panels, casting prism patterns across the marble floor. She sat among the orchids her careful hands had tended for years, her blue gala dress now wrinkled from the long night. I never meant to cause such chaos, Lisa spoke without turning, her fingers gently touching an orchid petal. The flower's delicate beauty seemed to mirror her own vulnerability in that moment. All these years, I just wanted to build something of my own. The bakery was supposed to be my fresh start, away from all this. Mark settled into the wrought iron chair across from her, loosening his bow tie. The weight of the previous night's confrontation hung between them. The bakery can still be your fresh start, he said. But maybe it can also be something more, a bridge between past and present. Lisa finally turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When I was little, my mother used to tell me stories about Sweet Dreams Confectionery. How the whole street would smell like chocolate and caramel. How children would press their faces against the windows to watch the candy makers work. Her voice softened with memory. She said it wasn't just a factory, it was the heart of the community. I've been looking into the factory's closure, Mark admitted. The official records claim it was for financial reasons, but something doesn't add up. The business was thriving, the workers were loyal, and then suddenly, everything stopped. No explanation, no warning. The morning light strengthened, illuminating dust motes that danced between them like carried secrets. Lisa pulled out a worn leather notebook from her bag, her mother's recipe collection. These aren't just recipes, she explained, carefully opening the aged pages. They're formulas from Sweet Dreams. My mother memorized them, wrote them down in code. She always said they were her insurance policy, but she never explained what she meant. Mark leaned forward, examining the careful notations and cryptic symbols. David's been pressuring me about the factory property for months. He wants to demolish it, build luxury condos. Says it's time to maximize family assets. His jaw tightened. But now I wonder if he's trying to bury something more than just an old building. A knock at the conservatory door interrupted them. A staff member entered with an envelope marked "Confidential, DNA results." The modern medical letterhead looked stark against the Victorian splendor of their surroundings. Mark accepted the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. "We don't have to open it," Lisa said quietly. "Maybe some questions are better left unanswered." Mark studied her face in the strengthening sunlight. "I've spent my whole life accepting the answers I was given. About our family, about what it means to be a Reynolds, about the right way to live. Maybe it's time for some new questions." The envelope sat between them on an antique table, both a promise and a threat. Outside the conservatory windows, the mansion's grounds stretched away in manicured perfection, every hedge and flower bed exactly where generations of Reynolds had decreed they should be. But here in this glass-walled sanctuary, something new was growing, something that couldn't be contained by society's careful boundaries. Lisa touched the birthmark on her shoulder, a gesture mirrored unconsciously by Mark. "Whatever that envelope says," she began, then paused, gathering courage. "Whatever we learn, it won't change who I am or what I want to build. The bakery isn't just about making money or proving something. It's about creating a place where people feel welcome, where status doesn't matter, where the smell of fresh bread and coffee can make anyone feel at home." Mark reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Then let's build it together. Whatever these results show, whatever David tries to do, we can create something new without destroying the past. Maybe that's what both our families have been waiting for, someone brave enough to bridge the gap." The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist outside. The envelope waited, holding truths that would reshape their understanding of family, legacy, and belonging. But in that moment, surrounded by carefully tended flowers and warming light, Mark and Lisa found themselves on the cusp of something that transcended blood ties and social boundaries, a chance to heal old wounds and build new dreams on the foundation of shared truth. The moment of truth arrived in the conservatory's golden morning light. Mark held the envelope containing the DNA results, its crisp edges pressing against his fingers as time seemed to slow around them. Lisa sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the navy blue dress from the gala now a reminder of everything that had brought them to this point. Mark broke the seal with deliberate care, the sound of tearing paper sharp in the quiet room. The morning sun streaming through the Victorian glass created rain, bow patterns across the clinical white of the medical documents inside. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the papers, years of questions about to be answered in black and white text. "Before I read this," Mark said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I want you to know something. These results won't change how I feel about helping you with the bakery or about standing up to David. Some connections go deeper than DNA." Lisa nodded, unable to speak. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, making each breath feel significant. She watched Mark's face as he began to read, searching for any hint of what the papers revealed. The conservatory's warm air seemed to thicken with tension. Mark's eyes moved across the first line of text, and his expression shifted from anticipation to confusion. The color drained from his face as he read further, his knuckles widening where he gripped the paper. Lisa leaned forward, concern overwhelming her own anxiety. "Mark, what is it?" Before he could respond, the conservatory door burst open. David stood in the doorway, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. The morning light caught the wild look in his eyes as he surveyed the scene before him. "So, the results are finally here." David's voice carried a dangerous edge. He stepped into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. "I suppose you think this changes everything, don't you? That a piece of paper can rewrite generations of social order." Mark started to rise, the test results still clutched in his hand, but David moved with unexpected speed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, snatching the papers from his brother's grasp. The sudden movement sent an orchid pot crashing to the floor, soil spilling across the marble tiles like black blood. "David, stop this." Mark's voice hardened with authority. "You can't keep controlling everything. and everyone. The truth deserves to be heard. The truth? David laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Which truth, brother? The sanitized version in our family histories? The whispered rumors in servants' quarters? Or perhaps the truth buried in the foundations of Sweet Dreams Confectionery? Lisa stood slowly, her presence commanding attention despite David's theatrical display. Whatever those results say, they're part of my history too. I have a right to know. David's gaze snapped to her, calculation replacing his momentary loss of control. Your history? You think a shared genetic marker gives you claim to the Reynolds legacy? Our grandfather built an empire from nothing, and I won't let it be dismantled by some long-buried scandal. The air in the conservatory grew thick with unspoken accusations and generations of secrets. Mark moved to stand between David and Lisa, his posture protective, but his voice remained calm. The empire you're so desperate to protect was built on more than just Reynolds' ambition. Sweet Dreams Confectionery was a partnership, wasn't it? A partnership that ended under suspicious circumstances. David's grip on the test results tightened, crinkling the papers. Some partnerships need to end for the greater good. Some truths need to stay buried for everyone's protection. Father understood that. Why can't you? Morning sunlight continued to stream through the conservatory glass, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to mock the darkness of the moment. The broken orchid pot lay forgotten, its soil staining the pristine marble floor. In that tense tableau, 3 lives balanced on the edge of revelation. Mark, desperate to uncover the truth. Lisa, standing firm in her right to know her own history. And David, clutching papers that could unravel decades of carefully maintained control. The DNA results, now crumpled in David's white-knuckled grip, held answers that could reshape their understanding of family. Why, legacy, and justice. But as the morning light painted shadows across their faces, it became clear that the true test wouldn't be found in genetic markers or medical reports, but in the choices they would make in the moments to come. The conservatory had become a battlefield of long-buried truths and present-day power struggles. David stood with the crumpled DNA results in his fist, morning light casting harsh shadows across his face. The broken orchid pot at his feet served as a stark reminder of how quickly carefully cultivated appearances could shatter. You know what our grandfather used to say about Sweet Dreams Confectionery? David's voice carried a bitter edge as he paced the marble floor. He called it his greatest achievement and his biggest regret. I never understood what he meant until I found the old partnership documents. Mark stepped forward, his expression hardening. Documents you conveniently never shared with the board or with me. Just like you've hidden everything else about the factory's closure. Tell me, David, what happened to the Morgan family's stake in the business? A series of emotions flickered across David's face. Anger, fear, and something that looked almost like shame. I protected our family's interests, just as Father taught me. Just as generations of Reynolds men have done. By stealing from your partners? Lisa's voice cut through the tension, stronger and clearer than ever before. She moved to stand beside Mark, her presence commanding attention. My grandmother didn't just work at Sweet Dreams, she helped build it. Those recipes in my mother's notebook, they're not copies. They're originals. David's laugh held a note of desperation. You expect anyone to believe that? A housekeeper's family claiming credit for Reynolds' success? The society pages will have a field day with this fantasy. It's not a fantasy. Lisa retrieved her mother's notebook from the table, holding it like a shield. Every recipe in here has a story. The maple cream caramels? Created by my grandmother during the war, when sugar was rationed. The chocolate-dipped honeycomb? My mother's innovation, tested in this very kitchen before the factory closed. These aren't just recipes, they're proof of partnership, of shared creation. Other members of the household staff had begun to gather at the conservatory's doorway, drawn by their raised voices. Among them stood Margaret, the head housekeeper, her usual stern expression softening as she watched Lisa stand her ground. Mark moved to one of the conservatory's built-in cabinets, retrieving a leather-bound folder. I found these last night, David. Original contracts showing Sweet Dreams was built on a partnership between Grandfather Reynolds and Eleanor Morgan. 50-50 ownership, profit sharing, creative control, everything split down the middle. The color drained from David's face as he recognized the documents. Those were supposed to be destroyed decades ago. Like the partnership itself was destroyed, Lisa's voice trembled with controlled anger. My grandmother disappeared the same week the factory closed. My mother spent years searching for answers, keeping these recipes safe, hoping someday the truth would come out. The truth. David's composure cracked further. The truth is that some people aren't meant to share power. The Reynolds name means something in this city. We build things, we control things, we don't split them with the help. Lisa finished for him. That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed something beautiful. Sweet Dreams wasn't just a factory. It was proof that true partnership knows no social boundaries. My grandmother and your grandfather understood that. They created something magical together, something that brought joy to an entire community. The gathered staff members murmured in agreement. Stories of Sweet Dreams confectionery had been passed down through generations of service. Recurs, tales of a time when the boundary between upstairs and downstairs hadn't been quite so rigid. Mark spread the partnership documents on a nearby table, their yellowed pages containing the evidence of a more equitable past. It's time to make this right, David. The Reynolds legacy you're so desperate to protect? It's built on a foundation of collaboration, not control. These documents prove it. David's gaze darted between the faces surrounding him, his brother's determination, Lisa's quiet strength, the supportive looks from the staff. The carefully constructed walls of privilege and power he'd maintained for so long began to crumble. Lisa stepped forward, her voice gentler but no less firm. I don't want to destroy the Reynolds legacy, David. I want to honor the true spirit of Sweet Dreams, a place where creativity and collaboration meant more than social status. My dream of opening a bakery? It's not about competing with your family's empire. It's about reviving something precious that was lost. The morning sun had risen higher, its light now falling directly on the scattered soil of the broken orchid pot. In that illuminated moment, the truth lay exposed like seeds ready for replanting, the partnership that had been buried, the dreams that had been deferred, and the possibility of growth that came with facing the past honestly. After the intense confrontation, Mark and Lisa found themselves in the mansion's library, a space that had witnessed generations of Reynolds family decisions. Afternoon light filtered through leaded glass windows, illuminating the oak-paneled walls and leather-bound volumes that lined them. The DNA test results, now smoothed out from David's crumpling, lay on the massive mahogany desk between them. The household had settled into an uneasy calm. David had retreated to his office downtown, his worldview shaken by the morning's revelations. The partnership documents from Sweet Dreams Confectionery remained spread across a side table, their yellowed pages telling a story of collaboration and betrayal that spanned generations. Mark sat in his father's old leather chair, his fingers tracing the edges of the DNA report. Before we read these results, he began, his voice gentle, I want you to understand what we've already discovered. The connection between our families isn't just about genetics. Sweet Dreams wasn't just a business partnership. It was a bridge between two worlds. Lisa nodded, settling into a chair across from him. The afternoon sun caught the silver threads in the fabric of her dress, still wrinkled from the previous night's gala. My mother used to say that some bonds are stronger than blood. I never understood what she meant until now. Mark began to read the results aloud, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The genetic analysis confirms a familial relationship between Mark Reynolds and Lisa Morgan. He paused, looking up to meet Lisa's eyes. We share approximately 6.25% of our DNA, consistent with second cousins. The revelation hung in the air between them. They weren't siblings, as some had speculated, but their connection was real, a testament to the intertwined histories of their families. Second cousins, Lisa repeated softly, a smile playing at her lips. Our grandparents were more than just business partners. They were family. Mark continued reading, his expression growing more animated. The shared genetic markers, including those responsible for the distinctive birthmark, suggest a common ancestor approximately 3 generations back. He looked up, understanding dawning in his eyes. That's why the partnership worked so well. Sweet Dreams wasn't just bringing 2 families together, it was reuniting branches of the same family tree. Lisa retrieved her mother's recipe book from her bag, opening it with new purpose. These recipes weren't just business assets. They were family traditions passed down through both sides of the family. The birthmark wasn't just a coincidence. It was a sign pointing us back to our shared history. The afternoon light strengthened, casting warm pools on the library floor. Outside, they could hear the normal rhythms of the household resuming, staff members going about their duties, deliveries arriving, life continuing despite the morning's dramatic revelations. "What happens now?" Lisa asked, her voice carrying both hope and hesitation. "Where do we go from here?" Mark stood, moving to the window that overlooked the mansion's grounds. "We honor the past by building something new." Sweet Dreams was more than just a candy factory. It was proof that great things happen when we tear down the walls between people. He turned back to face her. "Your bakery shouldn't just be your dream. It should be our way of continuing what our grandparents started." Lisa rose to join him at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. A place where everyone feels welcome, where creativity knows no social boundaries, where we can create something magical together, just like they did. "The Reynolds name still carries weight in the city," Mark acknowledged, "but maybe it's time that weight was used to lift people up instead of keeping them in their place. We can reopen Sweet Dreams, not just as a bakery, but as a symbol of what's possible when we acknowledge our shared humanity." The afternoon sun painted their shared birthmarks in golden light, no longer a source of mystery, but a badge of belonging. In that moment, they weren't employer and employee, or even distant cousins. They were partners in a vision that transcended social boundaries and generational wounds. The DNA results had confirmed what their hearts had already begun to understand. Family isn't just about blood quantum or social status. It's about the choices we make, the bridges we build, and the courage to acknowledge truth even when it challenges everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our place in the world. David Reynolds sat in his downtown office as evening approached, surrounded by the trappings of power that had defined his life. The city lights began to flicker on outside his window, but his attention remained fixed on an old photograph he'd pulled from his private safe. The image showed the original Sweet Dreams confectionery storefront, with his grandfather and Eleanor Morgan standing proudly before their shared creation. The truth he'd tried so hard to bury stared back at him in black and white. His phone buzzed with a message from his most trusted journalist contact. Story about Reynolds family, scandal ready to run. Old partnership documents, suspicious factory closure, hints of family connections. Your statement needed for balance. Deadline in 1 hour. David's fingers tightened on the phone. This was his last chance to control the narrative, to protect the Reynolds legacy as he understood it. He began drafting a statement that would paint Lisa as an opportunist, suggesting that old documents could be forged, that family resemblances could be coincidental. The words came easily. He'd spent a lifetime crafting perfect public responses. But before he could send his response, his office door opened. Mark entered, followed by Lisa, who carried a worn leather briefcase he'd never seen before. The sight of them together, their shared birthmark visible and their expressions resolute, made the carefully crafted statement on his screen seem suddenly hollow. "Whatever you're planning, David, it's over," Mark said quietly. "But we're not here to threaten or expose you. We're here to share something you need to understand." Lisa stepped forward, opening the briefcase. She withdrew not just her mother's recipe book, but a collection of letters, photographs, and a small diary bound in faded red leather. "My mother knew everything, David. About the partnership, about the family connection, about what really happened in the end. Sweet Dreams closed. She didn't just work there. She was protecting our family's legacy." David's practiced composure faltered as Lisa spread the documents across his desk. There, in his grandmother's distinctive handwriting, was a letter explaining everything. The Reynolds and Morgan families had indeed been related, separated generations ago by circumstances and social status. Sweet Dreams had been more than a business venture. It had been an attempt to heal an old family wound, to bridge a divide created by pride and prejudice. "Your father didn't destroy the partnership," Lisa continued, her voice gentle but firm. "He tried to save it." These letters show he opposed the factory's closure, that he wanted to preserve what his father and Eleanor had built. But he was outvoted by the board, pressured by people who couldn't accept what Sweet Dreams represented, the idea that true partnership knows no social boundaries. Mark moved to stand beside his brother's desk, picking up the old photograph. "Our grandfather and Eleanor created something revolutionary, David. Not just successful business, but a model for what society could be. That's the real Reynolds legacy. Not the walls we've built, but the bridges." David looked down at the scattered evidence of a history he'd never fully understood. His father's signature on a letter protesting the factory's closure. Photos of both families celebrating together at company picnics. News clippings praising Sweet Dreams as a model of social progress. "My mother didn't keep these documents to blackmail or threaten," Lisa explained. "She kept them because she believed someday the truth would matter more than pride. She believed in what Sweet Dreams represented, the power of people coming together across social divides to create something beautiful." The city lights grew stronger outside as darkness fell, but in David's office, something long buried was finally coming to light. He looked at his brother, at the woman who was now family in more ways than one, and at the evidence of a legacy far richer than the one he'd spent his life defending. "There's still time to make this right," Mark said softly. "Not just the legal partnership, but the spirit of what our grandparents built. Lisa's Bakery isn't just about reviving old recipes. It's about reviving a vision of what's possible when we acknowledge our shared humanity." David's gaze moved to his computer screen, where his defensive statement still waited to be sent. With a deliberate motion, he deleted it. "All these years," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought I was protecting our family's legacy. But I was just perpetuating the very divisions our grandparents tried to heal." Lisa placed her mother's recipe book on his desk, opening it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This was Eleanor's favorite recipe, maple cream caramels. "The first thing she and your grandfather created together. My mother used to say that every time she made them, it was like bringing the family back together, even if only in spirit." As night settled over the city, 3 descendants of Sweet Dreams' original partnership sat together, sharing stories that had been too long buried. The taste of truth, like the candies their grandparents once created, was both sweet and complex. But in acknowledging it, in choosing to honor the past while building something new, they found a way forward that would make their ancestors proud. The next morning's headlines wouldn't tell a story of scandal and division, but one of reconciliation and renewal. Sweet Dreams would rise again, not just as a bakery or a business, but as proof that the sweetest success comes when we dare to reach across the divisions that separate us, acknowledging the family we find in unexpected places.